Hello everybody, I'm Kevin Smith. Welcome to my video blog. This date today is 18th of November 2011. What I wanted to talk to you about today was the role of central banks around the world, what it is that they do, and also what is quantitative easing, a topic very central in the news these days. Central banks basically control a nation's money supply and they set the interest rates. The most important central bank in the world, in the global economy anyways, is the U.S. Federal Reserve, and Ben Bernanke is the chairman. One of the important features of central banks in most of the developed economies, major economies of the world, is that they are politically independent. Once they're appointed, they don't typically have to answer or respond to political influences, which allows them to operate independently of whatever's going on in the political lives of a nation. The control of interest rates and money supply is also referred to as monetary policy. This is a very different function than fiscal policy, which sets government spending and taxation. Fiscal policy is a very political process. Both monetary and fiscal policy can affect change or influence the direction of a nation's economy, and on aggregate, monetary and fiscal policy globally can affect the direction and change of a global economy. Monetary and fiscal policy initiatives in the recent recession have largely played out. Interest rates were reduced, and governments in the United States and around the world have increased their deficit spending. Both those two factors have served to raise the global economy out of a serious recession that we were in, which ended about a year ago. Even though we're no longer in a recession, however, the growth is still stubbornly slow. This is where quantitative easing comes in. This round is called Quantitative Easing 2 or QE2. You may have heard of this on the news quite a bit lately. An initial round of quantitative easing was launched in the very depths of the last recession that's now over. Think of quantitative easing as basically the central bank of a nation printing money, which is in essence what's happening. It's trying to dramatically increase the amount of money in an economy and increase the spending and velocity of money transacting in an economy by devaluing currency in relation to other goods and services, or even devaluing a nation's currency in relation to other currencies around the world. So why would they want to do this? To understand that, we have to look at inflation and deflation. Inflation and deflation, as I mentioned in a previous blog, cannot exist simultaneously. Deflation is a general declining of prices. Inflation is a general rising of prices. Inflation is by far the more normal scenario. Deflation is very dangerous for an economy, it's insidious, and it has to be fought with any means possible to bring to a close. And to help you understand why that's the case, think for a minute about an economy where the consumers in it believed that the prices of the things that they needed or wanted to buy are going to be cheaper 3 months or 6 months from now. Let's say you needed a vehicle, but you strongly believe that the prices on that would be cheaper in the future. Would you buy that vehicle? The answer for most people is no, they wouldn't. They wouldn't buy the vehicle. They would wait until the price bottomed out and then try to buy. This is basically the state that we've been in over the last 2 years since the financial crisis broke. For the first time that I've ever seen, and many people alive today have ever seen, we have a serious bout, or a serious risk anyways, of real deflation. In fact, asset deflation has taken place. Take a look at what housing values have done in North America for the most part over the last 3 or 4 years. Take a look at what the stock market has done over the last 3 or 4 years. Many major assets have substantially devalued over the last few years. And deflation cannot be permitted to stand. So in quantitative easing, what Ben Bernanke and the central bank, I think, is trying to do is to devalue currency itself. To basically shatter the stagnant status quo that exists right now, which is a fear of deflation, which has led to money simply not trading hands, people not making purchasing decisions. QE2, or quantitative easing, should also help keep the US dollar low, which should help US exports in relation to its imports. And I refer primarily here to the US because, truthfully, that is the economy that the rest of the world needs to do the best in order for the global economy to itself repair. There was this notion of a lower dollar is not foreign to Canada. If you recall, throughout most of the 1990s, Canada had roughly a 63 to 65 cent dollar. There was a low dollar, seemed to be a low dollar policy at the time, and Canada as a nation benefited greatly from that during that period of time because our exports far exceeded our imports. It spurred a prolonged period of growth in the Canadian economy, which helped us ourselves bring our debt ratios as a nation back into line from a very, very high level. This is another byproduct that could happen from result of QE2. So QE2 has no shortage of critics though, because if you break the status quo, which is a fear of deflation, and instead replace it with inflation, which by the way is a much more normal state, that has problems potentially for countries like China that rely on a strong US dollar and strong US consumer and resist the temptation to raise their own currency, which is something that the rest of the world is asking them to do. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that the Chinese are feeling uneasy about the prospect of quantitative easing in the United States. It also is unpopular with inflation hawks that believe that the only role that the central bank should have is to fight inflation. And for the most part, that is what the role of the central bank is. The problem is that these aren't normal times. These are very unusual times. As I said earlier, never had to worry about deflation before, but for the last couple of years it has been a real concern. Bottom line is that I believe that the process of quantitative easing, or the policy of quantitative easing, is the right policy measure at this point in time. There are risks involved. I do believe inflation will come back. And I'm sure that the press, especially the financial press, is going to hold inflation out, or the fear of it, as the next great thing that we all need to be very, very worried about. I'm not saying that isn't true, but I think it's going to be overstated. A whole lot of great things, a whole lot of good things anyways, have to happen before you move from deflation to inflation. Bottom line is people have to start spending money again. And if that's what results in inflation, then I say let it happen. The Federal Reserve and the central banks around the world, for that matter, have vast experience and knowledge and measures to deal with inflation if and when it returns. So let's get back to that normal state of managing an inflation rate somewhere in the 1% to 3% range, instead of having to worry constantly about a fear of deflation, which is resulting in consumers not getting the cash out of their wallets and transacting business. And I refer to consumers here, but the same applies to businesses, which is potentially just as big a part of the economy as the individual consumer. So that's my thought on quantitative easing. I think that it's worth the risk. I don't think it's a big risk, and I think a whole lot of good things need to happen before you move from deflation into inflation, but that is what the press is going to ask us to worry about next. Please keep that in mind as you're watching the news. And just to give you a little bit of insight, I thought that I would do today as to what are they talking about when they're talking about quantitative easing. Thanks a lot, everybody. Hope you have a great holiday season coming up, and I'm looking forward to seeing you throughout next year and maybe even later this year and in our new office. Thank you very much.